Okay, and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
All right. So we're gonna talk about Luca Guadagnino's next film, Suspiria, and this was probably my most anticipated movie of the year. I think, like based on trailers and things like that. I was excited to see other movies this year, but this one, after seeing the trailer, I was really excited to actually sit down and watch this movie. And all the shots that were in the trailer and were obviously in the film. And I did get a really cool feeling from it. But I think the, very, very short reviews, I think there were some things that I felt like, especially at the end, it just seemed like it dragged a little bit. So we'll get into that later on. But I told Steph before I went to it, I was like, there's like really only two ways for this thing to go. Either it's going to be as amazing as I think it will be, and I'll love it, and it'll be awesome and perfect, or it's going to, not meet my expectations and it's going to be horrible. But I think somehow it has certain sections that are more impressive than I could have ever expected. And just amazing and awesome. And then it's got other sections of it that just don't really, match up to what I was hoping for. So it has somehow become kind of a mixture of both. So how about you?
I would agree with that. We will talk about the ending, but it's a different subject for me than the ebb and flow pace that you were talking about. I have issues with something that happens at the end. Actually, I have issues with the very last shot, and we'll talk about that later on. It kind of, spoiler for Paul's opinion, it kind of blows the whole movie for me, the very last moments, and we'll get to that eventually. I don't know. I didn't know how I was going to react to this film. I did not see anything but the very first kind of teaser trailer that came out, so I didn't really know. I like Luca Guadagnino. Call Me by Your Name. I saw The Bigger Splash. I like Dakota Johnson. I like Tilda Swinton. So I figured, all bets are off. But then things started to creep in through Facebook and IMDb and witches and dancers, and I was like, what's happening here? And I am good with perplexing, complex things that might not make sense to me. I usually go on a feeling, and I was surprised I gelled with this film as much as I did. Not surprised, just usually things that are just really avant-garde and left to center, I sort of just go with the visceral feeling, and I was going with this film, and everything was starting to, I wouldn't say make sense per se, but I feel like I was connected to it up until the very last, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes, give or take. And yeah, so I don't know how a person would put into words how they felt, but I know how I felt, and I was surprised I was as connected to this film up to the last 15 minutes. So yeah, it's one of those movies where my father's like, "What movie are you going to see?" And I was like, I don't know how to explain this to him, because he wants to go to the movies every time I want to go to the movies. And one day I'm going to take him to something like this and just say, well, you wanted to? Yeah, right. Can you imagine? I mean, he's 81 years old, and he is very set in his ways and very conservative in the best kind of ways. It's not an indictment of his beliefs or anything, but he just has a certain type of film that he will be able to adapt to. And I've taken him to some films that might be semi-challenging, but nothing like this at this point. And I've seen a couple of challenging films since I've lived here. Hereditary, I can't remember the other one, and I can't.
You should take him to The Favorite.
You think? Can you imagine?
No, I don't. Probably not. I don't know. I would be. That would be
Yorgos
really...
Lanthimos into my father's being on some kind of level.
That I couldn't watch it normally if I had like even if I had like Steph next to me, probably, because the whole time I would feel like she would be like, "This is a waste of my time." Like, I don't know. The Favorite is interesting. She might. I don't know. She might be a little bit more willing to see The Favorite because it's like turn of the century Victorian era type stuff. So maybe.
I just saw, as a matter of fact, I saw a trailer for that when I saw Suspiria, and it was an extended trailer, and it was a different trailer than I've seen before, and I'm really excited about that film on so many different levels. But the bottom line is my father's always been a really huge supporter of my theater aspirations, and he's seen some weird stuff. I mean, I've had to smoke pot, do cocaine, and say the F word like 40 million times in a play that he came and saw, and that was nerve-wracking because your father and blah blah blah, but he was all about it. My mother, on the other hand, she can't deal with that kind of stuff. She couldn't deal with that kind of stuff. So the point is that these are not the type of films that are naturally I adjust quickly to. This film I adjusted very quickly to, and that probably is a lot to do with Luca Guadagnino and his disposition. It's probably a lot to do with the performances. I like the way the film looks, and we could talk about that further on. But yeah, and the reason why I brought up my father was to say, people ask me all the time, what did I just see? What do you recommend? And this is one of those films where I wouldn't say, oh, go see Suspiria, without saying, but by the way, it's about witches who are dancers, and there's a lot of strange stuff that happens in the third act, or the fourth act, according to this. So good luck. Hold on tightly. But if I was telling you, yes, I would say, Josh, you need to see this film. But you're aware of this filmmaker, and you're aware of his world, and you're a Kubrick fan, and you're a Yorgos Lanthimos fan, and you have seen Antichrist and Lars von Trier's in his whatever you want to call it, his. So it would be easy to recommend this. There are films out there like Hereditary where I would want to mess with the mainstream and tell people who wouldn't traditionally go to a film like that, yes, go see it, just to kind of mess with their mind a little bit. But this is a very specific mess with your mind, so I would probably go a little easier.
I will step back a little bit and ask you, have you seen the original Suspiria that came out in 1977?
No, I've only seen stuff now on YouTube and little clips here and there, and people comparing certain things. Not much, but no, I've never seen it.
I saw it a while ago, and I know it was one of those things that I guess wasn't that insanely popular when it came out, or even right after it came out, but has gained some sort of like a cult type following. And I mean, it is very stylistic. It's a Dario Argento movie, co-written by Dario Argento, and listening to Luca Guadagnino on some of the podcasts that he's been on recently in promoting Suspiria, like, he knew from a very young age that he wanted to remake Suspiria, and that to me is really interesting, that he glommed onto this movie and he kind of like set out to remake the movie, purposefully. It wasn't like oh, look, somebody's remaking Suspiria, maybe I'll get involved. Like, he purposefully like went after this movie. So it's interesting to see the difference between the original 77 movie and this movie, which I don't really think is necessarily a remake. It's just using certain aspects of the original movie and changing them and morphing them into what he and his writer wanted to do in this movie. But the original one was really colorful, was sensationalist. It was a horror movie. It was about witches, and it was in a dance troupe, type of a thing. But famously, the movie has no dancing in it. And it, the original one, and it really just kind of like, hangs on the some kind of like gore and suspense kind of, but really more like, like creepiness, the creepiness factor of the movie, and these really like insanely lit scenes that have primary colors and are just completely unnatural to what you would see in the real world. And it enhances the movie a lot because it puts you in, as a viewer, it puts you in an awkward position. You don't have a good reference for certain things because it's not how it would normally look, and so it kind of gets you out of your element and gets you in an uncomfortable position. And I think this movie does that too. It just does it in a different way, and it does it kind of in the opposite way, where it's not using crazy primary colors, but the way they frame certain things, how they do the lighting, how they use natural lighting, and also listening to Guadagnino talk about how him and his cinematographer Sayambu Mugdipram, I think I said that right, but I am not sure. Hearing him say it, but he's saying it with an Italian accent, so I really don't know. I mean, I'm just hoping that's close. So don't come after me. But
Well, actually, how you pronounce it is this, Josh. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll add it in there.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine me of all people pronouncing it correctly and redirecting how you pronounced it? That will be the day. That will be the day that something really has been accomplished in my life. I'm telling you, because I'm staying far away from these names, man. Because are you kidding me? It took me forever to pronounce Guadagnino's name because I was afraid of it. But this time next year, maybe I'll know it.
Hey, there you go. So, but yeah, that cinematographer also shot Call Me By Your Name, and then he has done some other movies. There was a movie that I heard about a long time ago that I heard was really good, a Thai movie that he's a Thai cinematographer, or he's from Thailand, but called Uncle Boon Me, Who Can Recall His Past Lives. It's supposed to be a really good movie. Haven't seen it yet, but I really do want to see it. And now that I've seen both Call Me By Your Name and this movie, it makes me want to kind of seek out that Thai movie. So anyway, those guys decided to shoot on film, first of all, which is, I think, a big deal. And they also decided to, how Guadagnino described it was he uses filters on the lens of the camera. So what that ends up doing is it ends up like literally coloring, but changing the image as it's going into, as it is actually being captured onto the film permanently. And then afterwards, there can be manipulations and adjustments in a digital intermediate where they scan the film in, and then they make, color corrections and adjustments on computers later on. But what most people do is they don't put any filters on these lenses. They use really expensive lenses, and they're really fancy, and they capture it on 35 millimeter film, which is very, very high resolution, higher than 4K resolution. If you've got a 4K TV at home or something, film is much higher than 4K resolution. So they're getting this pristine image that they're then able to manipulate, in the post-production, period of making of the film. But by forcing this image in and forcing these types of color palettes and this look into the film initially, there's really no way to get away from that. And you're kind of like, it's a risky thing nowadays, especially because you're committed to doing it in that way. And so I think it paid off, because there are certain shots that I just don't know if you'd be able to pull that kind of a feel and get that kind of a, the noise in actual film looks different than, digitally added noise into an image that was captured, digitally, not going through film at all. And I think maybe that's the way that they got some of these kind of like iconic, maybe they're not considered iconic by most people, but for me, the things that drew me to this movie, the images that drew me to this movie, even scenes where you're just seeing, like, there's a scene where she's getting ready to, try out for the dance troupe, for very first time. And she's just warming up, and it's just kind of like a, close up type portrait shot of her. And it just looks, it's really desaturated, and it just looks like the 70s. Even the first scene with Chloe Grace Moretz, like that, there's just this kind of like lived in look of the 70s, and they're using zooms, which people don't use much anymore, barely at all, but that was something that was really big in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and throughout the 70s, I guess. So they're using zooms, they're using, cranes and dollies, And, nowadays we use, steady cams a lot, where the camera's more like floating. Well, this one, they're measured camera movements and, panning and zooming, which was very 70s. So it does, the way they shot it and the camera moves that they used makes it feel like it's in the 70s. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm kind of amazed by, that somebody shot this a year and a half, 2 years ago, and it feels like it was shot 40 years ago. So yeah, that's really cool to me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It gives a texture, it gives a sense, it gives a feeling. And I grew up in the 70s, and that's what all film looked like when you went to the movies. It was this kind of gray tone to everything, and it's in this film too. And I think that's important to the setting, being in Berlin and being wintertime. It just gives you a sense of, I won't say foreboding, but that's actually a pretty good word. There is something always lurking right behind somebody's shoulders, over somebody's shoulders in this film. And that color palette from all of those techniques that you just described is what does that. It gives this feeling of something is not right here. There's something askewed. Even if you don't have an idea of what this was, I didn't know until like maybe the night before or a couple hours before that it was about witches. I knew it was kind of about dancers, but I didn't really know what it was about. So I just thought it was, young American girl goes to foreign country, has to deal with prima donna dancer Tilda Swinton to become part and taken seriously in this dance troupe. But there's this sense of something else, something wicked this way comes, that's there. And I think that's the color palette, and I think that's the way that they shot it. And once again, we've talked about this before, about keeping film viable, investing in Kodak and keeping film an actual possibility. And this is proof that that's why you want to do that, because if it didn't work, or what he was doing didn't work, he could just go back and film it again digitally, or go back and film it normally without the lenses, and then do it digitally. He has that option, but because it does work, it gives this sense of something else is there. And that's a reason to always keep something around, just like we've talked about a million times before. You recreating a car from the 70s is not the same thing as having a pristine car from the 70s. It's just not. You can feel something differently as an audience when something is digitally manipulated, even if it's just done to for colors. I just put tones and colors together. Tones and colors and stuff like that. Even if it's just for background stuff, you still have a sense. There's something about the way the brain will not take it in just yet. It's not 100% convincing on every level. You get a sense about it. So it's just an answer to why should we keep film around? So you can do something like this and get the sense of something is coming. Not necessarily coming for you as an audience member, but something is not right here. And you kind of know it by the whole opening sequence. The first act is what he calls it. You know something's not right. And you learn very quickly because they lay it out between the doctor and Chloe Grace Moretz, right? Mm-hmm. They lay it out. She says she thinks they're witches and blah, 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 blah. So you know instantaneously something's going on, but you're not sure. And it also lends itself to, is this something in this young lady's mind? Or is this a psychological thing, which is what the doctor believes, of course, or is it something else? And because of the way the film looks, you know it's something else. Even if it's just inside the core of your soul, you know it. So there you go. It works.
And we do get, kind of an entry into the backstory of the witches and all that stuff through Chloe Grace Moretz's character. And we also get to meet the Josef Klemperer character. So there's been a lot said about this character recently, and I had it kind of ruined for me when I went to IMDb one day. But maybe it's a little bit more open. When did you realize that Josef Klemperer was? Spoilers. If you don't know, then go see the movie. But when did you know that he was played by Tilda Swinton?
2 minutes ago when I looked at IMDb.
Wow.
I had no idea. None whatsoever. Now, I knew something was I couldn't tell whether or not it was a younger actor playing an older guy and he was in really old age makeup, and that was going to play into the film later on, that he was going to sell his soul to the devil and become young again. I thought it was something like that. But they do such a great job. This makeup artist deserves to be nominated for the Oscar, because not only did I not know it was Tilda Swinton, I was convinced that in some shots I couldn't tell that wasn't an older guy. I just could not tell. And then I just happened to look over, and I was thinking a point I'm going to make later on. I happened to look over at IMDb, and I was like, what? Wait, what's happening here? No idea. There's nothing about it that reminded me that it was a female, that it was Tilda Swinton. And I know I've been saying this a lot this last podcast season, and Tilda Swinton has an Oscar already, but if there is a reason to give her another nomination, and it looks like this category is getting, piled with people at this point. The supporting actor category and actress category are going to be huge this year, and there's so many possibilities. But because she's so convincing as this older German doctor, it almost begs for an Oscar nomination, because I had no idea. Now, that said, it could be just the makeup. It could be the makeup. I mean, it's what she does with it, of course. But there was a sense of the way that the character walked and talked that I thought he was going to become younger. But did I know it was a female? Not at all. Did I know it was Tilda Swinton? Not at all. And it's kind of a shame. You just said that it got ruined for you, right, when you were looking on something on IMDb?
Well, it did. I just was on IMDb. I just went to imdb.com to look something up, and then it was like in the bottom it said like, crazy makeup transformations, and they had a couple in there, and one of the pictures was the Klemperer character, and I knew it was from Suspiria. I just had, because I've seen the trailer a few times, and then they had right next to that character's image, they had Tilda Swinton. And I was like, what? And then I was like, I went away from it, but then I didn't even look at the Suspiria IMDb page. I didn't go there. I didn't even try to go there, but that was enough for me to be like, and once I started watching the movie, I was like, okay, I can kind of see it. The hands, it's hard to do hands and make them look, maybe this is stereotypical, but female hands and male hands are usually different. But yeah, so it was hard for I can imagine it was hard for them to make her hands look like stereotypical men's hands. So yeah, that must have been really difficult. But as far as the facial prosthetics and all that stuff, amazing. And then how I think that for me, that character, he, looked genuine almost all the time. There were only certain times when I could kind of tell that maybe certain things might not have translated it as well. I could kind of see Tilda Swinton through him, but only because I knew it was Tilda Swinton. But the most amazing parts were when he was really emoting, when that character was really emoting, I couldn't really tell. And he has that character has some really serious emotional situations in this movie. And that seemed completely genuine throughout the whole movie for me. So amazing performance. I thought that was crazy. And of course she's great as the, as Madame Blanc, the main, dance instructor. And she shows up a little bit later as another character. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, so Tilda Swinton is awesome. And we haven't talked about Dakota Johnson. And I guess some people don't like her or something, maybe because of her association with the 50 Shades of Grey. But, I haven't seen those. Steph and I actually tried to start watching the first one, and it was just like, this is really cheesy. Like, it wasn't good. And so, neither one of us have read the book or anything, but so yeah, I don't know. It didn't work out. So, but the first time I saw Dakota Johnson was in The Social Network. She was the one night fling with Sean Parker, with Justin Timberlake's Sean Parker in there, and it's the first time we meet his Sean Parker. So yeah, and I didn't know who she was at the time, or I didn't know her lineage and all that stuff. But, seeing her pop up in different things throughout the subsequent years, because that was like, 2010, I think that's when Social Network was. So yeah, it's been 8 years. And you said you saw A Bigger Splash, and she was in that, right, with Tilda Swinton.
And she's very good in that too. And here's the thing, I believe we've talked about this with other actors and with other actresses. Her father and mother being famous has to be as much a deficit as it is a benefit. And you still have to put in the work, and you still have to have the talent, and you still have to be able to be a working actress. So, and we've talked about being a working actor is not necessarily what we think. We think that, like, okay, everybody's going to become a working actor and become Bradley Cooper. It's just not how it works. We were watching like 20 years ago in college, give or take. We were watching something, and somebody was bagging on some actor and telling him, everybody how bad he thought he was in this miniseries on Lifetime or whatever it was. And I said, if he was from our class and he was a friend of ours, we would be celebrating that he's in this movie. Okay? Yes, he's not that great. Yes, we aspire to do much more thespian-esque things. Yeah, we get that. But as a working actor, you have to do what you have to do. So like everybody, Dakota Johnson has done what she can do to be a working actress. She's come up in the ranks, done small parts, Social Network, TV show, some kind of series. Zachary Quinto always comes to mind. Once he kind of started building a working resume as an actor, he got Heroes, and then he got American Horror Story, and then they were like, we need to get you some kind of like epic thing. Star Trek happens to him. Franchise, that's the word I was looking for. And then you become a bankable actor, and then you get to make choices. So for Dakota Johnson, if she did not do 50 Shades of whatever, then she might not be able to do Suspiria. She might be locked and loaded into doing small parts in Social Network as the pretty girl who just, kind of is there to point out that this is Sean Parker. We don't know. You have to do a certain level of, paying your dues, that kind of stuff. So anybody who judges Dakota Johnson based on the 50 Shades of Grey series is not really giving her due. I've been lucky. She was turned on to me. I can't remember what it was that I first saw, and then I saw The Bigger Splash, and I put together that this is Dakota Johnson from 50 Shades of Grey, and I thought, and I even had a twinge of, what is this woman doing in a movie with Ralph Fiennes and Tilda Swinton? Like, she doesn't deserve to be because she was in 50 Shades of Grey. That is so judgmental and so like box shortening. You can't do that to people. So anybody who is judging an actress by making a paycheck so they can do other things isn't really understanding what that game is all about. It's a business, entertainment business. So luckily, I got to see The Bigger Splash before I saw, and I have not really seen 50 Shades of Grey of anything. I've seen trailers and scenes and stuff like that. And it's just one of those things that if it was a stormy night and I had nothing better to do and somebody I knew wanted to watch it and I had a couple glasses of wine, I probably would watch it. But it's just not, it doesn't call to me. But I'll tell you what, if I went to school with Dakota Johnson or she was a friend of mine, I would have been front row, day it open with my popcorn going, woo, be a working actress. So people need to they just need to not judge people by what they think people are doing. Because my point to that is, if not for 50 Shades of whatever, then there probably wouldn't be Suspiria. And she's extremely good in this. She is very good in this.
Whatever anybody says about her, she puts in the work in this movie, and it shows. And she is amazing. I did read that she spent 2 years training to dance. Now, I think she does have like a dance double in certain things, but I mean, really, a lot of the times that you see her on screen, she is dancing. There's none of this like, face replacement, CGI. And that was one of the other things that Luca Guadagnino said on his interview, is that, while, there was certain CGI in certain scenes, especially in the dance scenes, there's multiple scenes in this room, in this dance studio, that has mirrors all around it. And I guess I'll say this now. We're going to start getting into spoilers. So, if you haven't seen it and you're kind of, this is the type of movie you like, then I definitely go see it. It's really cool. It is, disturbing and arresting film to see on the screen. So we're gonna start getting into spoilers. So there's the Olga scene where Olga's in that mirrored room, and I was amazed to hear that there really wasn't much CGI in that scene. She's just such an amazing dancer that she can contort her body in all of those ways to where her limbs are bending in ways that it looks like they're broken, but I guess they're not.
That's disturbing that somebody can do that. And you get a sense when you're watching it that this is not, it's all natural. It's not right that you're watching somebody's body. It's like when you see somebody dislocate something because they're double jointed, and you're like, that is wrong on so many levels. And it's the opposite of what we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. I was wishing that I found out that this was CGI so I would feel better about it, but something inside me knew it wasn't, because it's hardcore.
Those scenes, there's a lot of scenes in that room especially where they do use CGI, but it's only to remove the camera, because the camera either goes behind her or around, and it would be in a reflection, and they just remove the reflection of the camera in the mirrors, similar to what Damien Chazelle said they did in First Man, where they removed the camera from the viewfinder, or the face covering on when they were on the moon. So yeah, I mean, that to me, that whole scene, I mean, this movie's a long movie, and that scene felt like it was 2.5 hours long itself. The Olga, being beat to death and ripped apart and twisted and mangled. So, I mean, it was, I could tell people in my movie theater were just, we were just, at some point we were like, oh, that's gross. And I guess people really are like, love horror movies, and they love the gore, and they love all that stuff. And that's fine. I'm okay with it, I guess, up to a certain point. But, I mean, I definitely got to the point where I was like, I get it. And I understand why, filmmakers will, push that, because they're trying to, push the audience. But it was really rough to watch, and it wasn't the last scene in there that was rough to watch. But yeah, I mean, seeing that scene, and also, I mean, not to take anything away from Dakota Johnson in that scene, her dancing throughout the movie, especially in that scene where she's dancing the Volk dance, and then in the previous time when she was dancing, when she was doing her tryout. I mean, I thought it was really cool that they chose to not have any music with the tryout. That was really neat, and they were able to really ramp up the sound design at in that scene, where you hear her feet, shuffling along the wood floor, and her breathing, and it's so rhythmic, and it's musical, and it's lyrical, but there is no music there. So I thought that was spot on, really cool, and a different way of engaging the audience in dance without being like, hey, you're watching Dancing with the Stars, or you're watching So You Think You Can Dance. It's a totally different feeling. It's earthier and more primal and more intimate, I think.
Well, the sound design adds to a lot of different things. It adds to the creepiness of it because of all the cracking and slapping and stomping that you hear, and the breathing all adds to that. And I wouldn't even say creepy is a good enough adjective to describe it. Unsettling. Here's the thing that's interesting to me. Yes, it does go on a little too long, because you're in the first couple of contortions, you're like, okay, we get it, stop. And I understand why he kept going, because it is disturbing and it is a horror flick. So I understand why he kept going. What's interesting to me is that the dance that Dakota Johnson is doing at that time is as interesting as what's happening in the mirrored room. So if you were to separate and just get to watch what Dakota Johnson's dance looks like, it would be as interesting a dance piece as it would be a horror dance piece, and obviously there's powers that are not in control or being controlled. We're not sure at the time by other witches and other things that are happening to where this dance is actually causing this other dancer who's trying to leave the troupe to contort her body, and basically this dance is the murder weapon. It is the weapon that they use to kill this woman, or at least beat the hell out of her until she just can't take it anymore. But the point is that if you can make something interesting as a dance and interesting as a horror piece at the same time, or a horror scene, or a frightening murder scene, that's interesting to me, because my mind now thinks, what would that dance have looked like by itself? That to me is interesting, that he could make it so intriguing on both levels that I want to know what that dance looks like by itself. That might be some kind of like denial, where I want to see the dance cut away from the murder because I don't want to see that murder ever again. But it's extremely well done. And you're right, it comes down to the Foley artist and how they make those sounds match up, and it comes down to the movement. And I believe that the woman playing Olga is Elena Faukina, I believe her name is. I believe she's a real dancer, and this is her first movie. This is her, she's superb. If this is her first movie, she's got a lot to do that's important. She sets this whole movie up. This scene sets this whole movie up, and the before and after are important. The acting scenes are as important, but it's interesting that somebody who is a professional dancer who can do that with her body is as intriguing as somebody who is non-professional dancer. So the actress had to look like a dancer, and the dancer had to look like an actress, and they both pull it off. And I want to make a point about Dakota Johnson. You started this conversation with, or this part of the conversation with, the fact that she trained for 2 years, regardless of whether or not they superimposed CGI faces like they do in Black Swan. It doesn't matter. She trained as if she was going to be the dancer. That's the actor's job. That's the actor's obligation. So whether or not she pulled off the dancing, whether or not they were able to use her, and I believe they use her much more than we probably think, or we would expect if you were to use a real stunt double dancer, for lack of a better term. But the job of Dakota Johnson was to train as if she was a dancer, not to be a dancer per se, but to look like she was a dancer. And that's the actor's job. And she pulls it off. There was a moment when I was watching, not necessarily that sequence, more so the later dance sequence, which we're going to get to also, that I was wondering, there were certain shots where I was like, is that Dakota Johnson? Is that not Dakota Johnson? There's a point, though, just like with Tilda Swinton playing the doctor in makeup, where your mind just shuts off and doesn't care anymore. You just buy into it. You just 100% buy into it. It's no longer about, I can tell the CGI, or is that the dancer? Your mind shuts off. And that's because Luca Guadagnino is telling an interesting story, and his narrative is interesting to the point where you don't care anymore. You buy into it and you move on. If the narrative wasn't as interesting or as intriguing, then we would start going, oh yeah, you could tell that's lady in old man makeup. Oh yeah, you could tell that's a body double, or that's a stunt double, or that's a dance double, that kind of stuff. But because the narrative is so interesting and you're so intrigued in what's going on, it goes out of your mind.
I do like the fact that they bring in the supernatural element of the movie very, very early, like right immediately with Chloe Grace Moretz talking to the psychiatrist or psychologist, whatever, about that at the beginning. And then there's a scene that's very close to the beginning where all of the witches are voting on, who to be the next, head of the coven, Marcos or Blanc, and it's very clear that it's like there's no, there's definitely real witch stuff going on here, and it's clear, and we get some kind of like weird insights into some of the witches. There was one of them that I'm trying to find her name, but she was kind of like looking on to the dance like from the balcony at some point, and she ends up like stabbing herself. Like, I still don't understand that. There's a few things in this movie that I do not understand.
You know what that reminded me of? You ever seen The World According to Garp?
No.
That movie, or read the book? Well, there's a character in there called Ellen James, and there are Ellen Jamesians who follow her. And unfortunately, it's a sad storyline where this woman was raped, and they cut her tongue out so she couldn't bear witness to who it was. And Ellen James, that's what happens to this character in the movie. And then Ellen Jamesians, they, out of dealing with society, cut their tongues out to say they are. It's a crazy book and it's a crazy movie, and I love it. But there was something about, there's a character in the World According to Garp who becomes an Ellen Jamesian, and it adds to something that happens later on in the movie and in the book. And that character reminded me of this witch character, not only in look, but in disposition, where you're not sure, is this person really with the coven? Is this person against? Is this person got some kind of secret thing going on that we don't know? Is she perplexed because she doesn't like what's going on in the coven? And then all of a sudden she stabs herself in the neck, and you're like, what's going on there? Here's the thing about it. For me, the character was a little obvious on the surface. Her hair, her clothes, her glasses, her physicalizations all added up to, this is not going to end well. It was a little too obvious, in my opinion. Not only do you not know why she did what she did, there is no explanation. I guess you can just, what you were feeling up to that point in the film would be the explanation for me. Not only is there no explanation, but that character is so overdrawn, but at the same time, you know nothing about her. So I don't know what he was going with by putting that character in. Is it the middle ground between the witch who decides to leave the coven and the dance troupe and then gets murdered, but she definitively knows what they're doing is wrong? And then the other side, if you want to call Tilda Swinton the person who believes that the coven is doing the right thing and wants to stay, or wants to be fully invested in the coven, then the middle ground would be this witch who stabs herself in the neck. I was perplexed by that because I was like, what are we supposed to be taking from this? And I don't know why directors and screenwriters do that. And I would like to have some form of explanation of why that was. But fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, most film makers and screenwriters will be like, well, it was left up to the audience interpretation. Art is in the eye of the beholder, which we've talked about that before. But at the same time, it was so significant in that moment, I would like to know what they meant by that.
Yeah, and I think that there's a bunch of, not a bunch, there's a handful of things in this movie where I think multiple viewings will help to inform what they were going for. But I think, it's rough with a movie, especially like a movie that's not just like a, popcorn blockbuster type movie, to really internalize all of those things, the first time you see it. So, and especially a movie like this that, is visceral and is, it's a complex but visceral and, emotional movie. So it's, hard to take all that in all at once. But the character we're talking about is Miss Griffith, played by Sylvie Testude. So yeah, I don't know, crazy character. I want to talk about the score. This is Tom York's first score. He's the lead singer for Radiohead, and he. It sounds like Luca Guadagnino, went to him, to ask him if he could score the movie, and he said yes, but neither one of them were, I guess, sure what was going to happen. But I think that it's definitely an affecting score, and I was a little thrown off with the title sequence where he started singing in the score. That seemed a little
Tom Yorkish.
Well, it is Tom Yorkish. You're right, but it seemed a little out of place for me, and I still don't know where I fall on that. I don't know. But as far as the rest of the pieces of music throughout the movie, there's some really powerful pieces of music that are really rough to hear when you put his sounds to the visuals you're seeing, and it is, I mean, it's serious. So, the trailer was the first time I really heard some of those, and as the movie goes on, those pieces get more and more kind of like discordant and complex. And I tried to listen to it like after seeing the movie, on Spotify, just to like be like, yeah, I'm gonna listen to it, because I listened to the First Man score and a couple other scores from this year, and I don't have any issues, and it's good and it's fun and it's interesting and it reminds me of the movie. But this one, I couldn't do it. It was too ugh, it was too evocative of what I was seeing, and it wasn't like I was like in my car and I'm like, I don't want to feel this in my car. I don't want to go through this again. So, I had to turn it off. But so I guess that's a hallmark of an effective score.
Yeah, before I go into how I felt about that, that has happened to me before. I was listening to the Franco Zeffirelli soundtrack of Hamlet, the one with Mel Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so spooky and so scary and so eerie, I turned it off. And I don't think I've listened to it again. And yes, it was right around Halloween. And yes, it was dark and I was by myself. And I might have been in a frame of mind of being paranoid anyway. But I was like, this is freaking me out. It was not reminding me of what I saw in the movie. It was taking on a life of its own. So that's actually a compliment that you felt that way about the soundtrack. Here's what I'll say. It's interesting because when I saw Tom York's name, I thought, okay, well, this will be, interesting because, his bandmate, Johnny Greenwood, did the soundtrack for There Will Be Blood, and nothing about that reminds me of anything I've ever heard before. And we've talked about that in the past, about the Oscar nomination issues and stuff like that, and how it's so set apart from anything that you're used to when it comes to Radiohead. But when Tom York starts doing what he does vocally, you cannot not compare it to what he does in Radiohead. You just can't. And I like a lot of stuff that they do. It reminded me of OK Computer, which is an album that I listen to at least once or twice a year to try to understand why everybody was so over the moon about that. I'm a big Pablo Honey fan, which, of course, all the people who are OK Computer fans are like, oh, that's the kind of sellout version of Radiohead. This is the real version of Radiohead. I like Pablo Honey. I just like that album. I like it from beginning, middle, and end. I also like Kid A better than I like OK Computer.
I like Kid A a lot.
Yeah, I like that album a lot. And I try to get what people are getting from OK Computer. I just have not heard it yet. And I keep thinking, is it me? Am I putting some kind of blockage up to it? So there were many times throughout the soundtrack for Suspiria that I thought it would have been nice for him to have done something not in his wheelhouse. This all felt in his wheelhouse. It didn't add or distract or take me out of the film. It didn't influence anything that I was thinking or feeling about the film. I kind of forgot about it after a while, but we've talked about this in the past too, where you have a much more emotional reaction to soundtracks than I do. They get inside you and they stay with you. For me, if it's not so bad that I notice it or not so great that I notice it, I sometimes don't notice it. And a lot of people would say that's a compliment. That's what a soundtrack should do. And I was trying not to put my assumed associations with Radiohead to Tom York's soundtrack. But as it was kind of going on and on, especially the opening sequence with the song and the lyrics and the kind of drone-ish quality, and that's good in a lot of places on Radiohead albums, I was thinking to myself, I wish this was something other than what I would have expected. And maybe because it's his first soundtrack, and you sent me a podcast with an interview with Luca Guadagnino, and he doesn't talk a lot about this film in the interpretations of this film, but he does talk about what he wanted. Well, when he asked Tom York to do the soundtrack, and then Tom York came back with some music and there were vocals on it, Luca was like, I wasn't expecting that, but that was a good thing in his opinion, so he went with it. The bottom line for me is, if there is one reason to watch this movie again, other than the perplexing ideas that have no answers to them, that I might have a closer answer to, other than the visceral feeling that I have from this movie, maybe seeing it again and actually keying into the soundtrack will help that. And like I said, it didn't distract, but at the same time, I was expecting or hoping for something other than, if somebody had just played a snippet of it and said, okay, out of these 10 rock stars, who is this? You wouldn't even have to have guessed. You could easily say this is Tom York. And that's a compliment because he has a style and he has a way of doing things. I'm just wondering, on a future visit to this film, is it going to add something more to it?
I don't know. I will definitely see this movie when it comes out on Blu-ray. So there's all kinds of questions I have. One of which is, what is the the Dr. Klemper's subplot, focusing on, like, what are we supposed to get from him and his wife, the kind of like flashbacks to him and his wife, and his whole relationship with her, and how it seems like initially he's supposed to be the audience surrogate in this movie, but there's got to be some added weight to him and his story. So that was something I had kind of a hard time with. And, much like Killing Me Softly, the Brad Pitt movie directed by Andrew Dominic, they used the television and radio and things like that to kind of like set the scene of 1977 Berlin and the Baader-Meinhof Red Army faction kidnappings, and what was happening in Germany at the time that all of this stuff was going on in the film. And it has to have some sort of a connecting tissue to the story that we're watching, the main story that we're watching, which is, Dakota Johnson's character, Susie Bannion, coming in from America and wanting to be a part of this, and then, how she interacts with Madame Blanc and all that stuff. So, that was something that it was hard to understand why they added that whole subplot in there. And I still don't think I understand. I read a little bit about the Red Army faction and about, the Baader-Meinhof gang and how they, the kidnappings and their requests for release of certain prisoners and all that. And I mean, I don't know if it's a generational thing, if it's cause obviously the main, the Klemper character, the psychologist, I mean, he lived through through World War II as a German, and he lost his wife because of that. So he had this guilt, and so that's what I think they're trying to explore. But do you have any insight on that? Or
no, I don't. And next to the ending and the final shot, these are the most perplexing things about this film for me, and not necessarily in a good way. You often see films that use television clips or radio stories or news stories on radios to color what's happening in the region that the movie is taking place in. And that's okay. So it just dawned on me, if this is almost 3 different movies, not necessarily one movie with 2 different subplots. It's really 3 different movies. And the witches and the dance are one. The subplot with the doctor and his wife is another. And then the subplot with the news that's happening in the 70s in Berlin at this point. I kept wishing I knew more about the culture and the history of Berlin at that time so I could understand why that's in the film. But then it also dawned on me that that's not really my obligation. My obligation is to take in what the film director is giving me. And that's fine that I don't get it, but there has to be a reason why it's there. There has to be something that Either he doesn't present in a way to make the audience, or at least myself, understand why we're watching this history lesson, um, or I just don't know enough about the history to take in what his point was, because it's not just news clips. It's a whole subplot about those hostages and about saving the hostages and the crisis that happens and who lives and who dies. And they make a whole thing about it. It's a whole subplot to the point where it's, in my mind's eye now, is becoming more of a plot than a subplot, because a subplot connotates that there's something that's going to connect it to the main plot that enhances the narrative of the main plot. At least that's what I would assume it was. And as for the subplot with the doctor, you're right. In the beginning of the film, you think this is just the audience's way into this world, because of one of his patients being an ex-witch, or possibly still a witch, we're not sure. And then his investigation of what happened to her leads him to the dance troupe, which, opens up the audience to a whole viewing of this dance troupe and the witches that we would not be able to see if we just went directly into it. This is from an outsider's point of view, investigating what's happening here. So you're assuming that when the doctor is learning things, the audience is learning things, because you're right, he's our eyes. But then they add in the subplot about his wife and concentration camps and everything that happened in that time. And as everybody knows, it's almost near to impossible to have somebody of that age in Berlin who doesn't mention that war, because it was such an impacting part of our history that you almost can't get away from it. But how does that add to the narrative of the witches? What is it that subplot, which really becomes a plot in amongst itself, what is Guadagnino trying to say to us, or what is the screenwriter trying to say to us that is important to the main narrative? Maybe nothing. Maybe he wants it to be three separate things that add into one. So for me, when I'm sitting there wondering what the history lesson is, instead of why that history lesson is important to the narrative, I think that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm being pulled out of the movie because I'm sitting here feeling like I'm at a deficit, that I don't understand Berlin's history enough to understand why that's important to what I'm watching in this present day plot line, which, if you want to call, the present day for the movie. So I don't know. It was frustrating, because I kept thinking to myself, is this a statement about evil? Is this a statement about society? He makes a couple of statements about rituals and religion and how everybody has their way of doing things. And there's a scene with Dakota Johnson's mother and the anointing of the sick. A minister comes in and gives her last rites. And he mentions, I think the doctor mentions, everybody has their way of getting through this world. And I thought that was a comparison. He calls that a delusion. He calls belief in that oil and anointing of the sick and all that other stuff their delusion of how to get through this existence. And I guess that was supposed to be in comparison to what the witches do, although one is helping a person pass over and possibly getting to eternity with God, and the other one is doing evil things. So there's that break, and I certainly don't want to compare or offend anybody by comparing somebody's religious belief to a coven of witches' beliefs. But obviously the doctor was trying to make a point, and the filmmaker's trying to make a point, that everybody has their talisman. Everybody has their way of getting through. As a person who was raised Christian and Catholic, we put a tree up every year. That was our talisman. That's how we got through the season, to make it brighter and more beautiful and to celebrate Christ's birth. That's what I was raised in. But anybody who's not raised in that might think that that's kind of strange, that you cut down a tree and decorate it and put it in. Although beautiful, and I think we've talked about this before. So the point to all that was, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to know. I want to take a class, and we've also talked about this before in the past, about when taking an art history class. I didn't know that that certain column meant something, and the way that it was carved and the way that it was used and what side of the building it's on, north, south, east, or west, and where it is in the town is all important to the artist. I didn't know any of that until I took an art history class. Now, when I look at things, I understand them on a different level. So I feel like there should be some kind of educational, podcast before you see a movie like this or after you see a movie like this that goes, okay, chapter 1, for what you didn't understand, this is what this meant. And then you can say, oh, I felt that, or I understood that, or I got that, or I didn't get any of that. So let me go rewatch it again and see what I think knowing. But are we supposed to be going to movies with a predetermined education or an understanding or finding out after the film what we should know? Shouldn't we be getting what we're supposed to be getting in that movie at the time? I'm asking as many questions right now as the film asks you to ask.
I think just hearing you talk about it, and actually your representation of the movie as 3 separate plots, I think is maybe it's helping me to come to terms with what they might have been trying to do. So you've got an older psychologist who represents the people who were living and adults during World War II. You bring in the Baader-Meinhof gang and the RAF and all of these kidnappings. I just looked up Andreas Baader was born in 1943, so he was basically not even around during World War II. So he's grown up in a completely post-World War II, post-Nazis being, tamped down and post-Hitler world and living in Germany during that time. And so I'm assuming that there is, a lot of cultural guilt to the people who were around and were alive and adults during to Germans who were alive and around during World War II. And he, as a German, might not have felt that. And that's why he wanted to get those people out. Maybe, I don't know. But ultimately, it's down to generations. So you have an older generation, you have a newer generation. And we're also seeing that take place in the Witch's Coven, with the older generation being Marcos, and then so you got Marcos, who's really, really old, who's falling apart, Mother Marcos, and then you've got the Madame Blanc, played by Tilda Swinton, who is the next in line, or whatever, supposed to be in line next, and she's also an older generation than Dakota Johnson's character. And so putting all those together, you have Dakota Johnson pretty much like coming in and just like running roughshod over this carefully constructed, hierarchy and grouping. And she's coming in and just, especially by the end, she's coming in and being like, guess what? Nope, I'm Suspirium and you're all dead. Because, anybody who wasn't, with me, or who doesn't believe that I can handle this, is gone. So, so she could, I guess, maybe be represented in the real world by the Baader-Meinhof gang, maybe. But I'm still noodling through that, and I don't know enough about what their motivations were, what the RAF was really trying to do, if they were trying to bring back Nazi Germany, or if they were trying to bring back German pride, or what they were trying to do. But it obviously was disruptive for Germans in the fall of 1977, and concurrently, Susie Bannion was disruptive to this coven of witches during that exact same time.
I don't think you're far off. I actually see that connection. But here's the thing. For me, I still think if I know exactly what the filmmaker wanted, I still don't think that's what I witnessed when I was watching the film. Like, if he explained to me this is why it's in the movie, I don't think I'm going to go, oh, I did get that. I just didn't know I got that. The bottom line is that the history lesson is too intense to be just history, and it's not connective enough to make it, or it's not small enough to make it just coloring the background. So we could go on and on. It just poses too many questions, and not the ones that I sometimes think just having a question is more interesting than having the answer, because you can live in a question and think, oh, well, I thought it was this, I thought it was that. When you know the answer, it kind of stops your imagination from growing.
Yeah. We haven't talked about Mia Goth yet, but I thought she did a really good job. She played Sarah, and she's the character who is kind of finding out that there are actually witches under, in that place. I don't think all of the dancers are witches at all. I think just the matrons, like just the directors of the thing are witches, and they've been trying to pull in someone. They initially tried to pull in the Chloe Grace Moretz character, Patricia, and she, rejected it and tried to get the heck out of Dodge, but wasn't able to. And then they were maybe thinking about Sarah, but then, Dakota Johnson shows up and they're like, oh yeah, well, this is definitely her. So, but I think Mia Goth did a good job. She was down underneath there and like kind of fell into that weird hole and broke her leg, and her whole freaking bone stuck out, and oof, bad news. But yeah, I think she's been in a couple other things. I was trying to think I thought I saw her in one of Cure for Wellness, which is not a good movie. But yeah, she was in that. Looks like she was also in Nymphomaniac Volume 2, but I never got to that one. I quit about 3/4 of the way through the first Nymphomaniac. And I haven't seen anything else that she's in. But yeah, so I think she did a really good job. And that ending scene when they're dancing to that piece, Volk, which I guess means people. I think Volk is German for people. Yeah, it's people. So, yeah, they, that I thought that was really well done. Like with their, whole get up of, you've probably seen it if you've seen, pictures, of the movie, the ropey type, red rope things they were wearing. I thought that was kind of cool. And then, we kind of get to this like epic end. What would you call it? A ritual scene, I guess. And we get to see the Mother Marcos for the first time, who is also played by Tilda Swinton, just for fun. So, and we get to see how all that plays out. And to me, that just went on way too long. I understood what they were going for, but it just felt like it was interminable in a bad way for me, because I felt like the Olga scene was long, but purposefully long. And this one, it was harder for me to justify how much time they took with this ritual scene.
I agree with everything that you say up to that point, and I think Mia Goth's performance is what leads us into that great dance performance and that whole sequence. And it's a bunch of holes that open up into the floor that she falls into one of them, and her leg. Ooh. Any bone sticking out, any compound fracture in a film is just horrific. And the sound is horrible, and the aspect of the holes opening up underneath her, where she probably would have done that in the next step anyway. So even if she had gotten away or down the hall, it's just, and you're right, she has such a little performance or a little character in the movie, small character in the movie, but it bodes well for the old saying of there are no small parts, only small actors, because she has to go from being naive to being educated to having her eyes open to being murdered or manipulated in this ritual at the end. And it's a small time she has on film to do that, and she does handle herself very well, because she is the innocence that you're supposed to believe Dakota Johnson is, and you do believe, and they become friends, and their relationship mirrors their innocence. Although Olga has been there a lot longer and understands the dance troupe on some kind of level, but she just understands it like this is the dormitory and this is let's whisper at night and let's giggle as girls and that kind of stuff. She doesn't really understand anything other than that. The fact that Dakota Johnson, when you find out that she is Suspirium or whatever that lady's name is, I call her the Supreme, you know that Dakota Johnson is doing a really great job because there are no indication up to that point that she's anything but this naive farm girl, which in a way, side note, I thought kind of happened way too quickly. I think you needed something, even small little indications that Dakota Johnson wasn't exactly who she said that she was. And maybe it's there, and maybe on a second viewing you'll see it, but all of a sudden she walks down there and she's like, yes, I am who I am. You must all die or worship me or whatever's getting ready to happen. Let me just get this black-looking devil person that put its hand up against me at one point in the film on the floor to come and kill you all. And it's a jump. It's a leap. That said, that dance sequence with the burgundy braided outfits is amazing. The whole thing is choreographed extremely well. It goes back to the point that even as a dance movie, this would be an interesting movie. I want to see those dances by themselves. I want to see that performance by itself. And it also bodes well for what I was talking about earlier with Tilda Swinton playing the doctor. She is incredible in that sequence because he knows something that is happening that the audience doesn't think he's supposed to know. We at some point have picked up on the fact that this is not going to be good for people, obviously, because of compound fracture and lady getting smashed up against a mirror window earlier in the film. We know something is not going well, but the doctor is putting it all together as the dance piece is going on. And the way that's all edited together and Tilda Swinton's performance is stunning. Now, when we get down to what I call the bloodbath, the bottom basement sequence, you're right, it does go on way too long. Here's why for me. You get the point in the first head that explodes. Yeah. And yes, it is supposed to be about witches who have power, who can do things. That's obvious because earlier on in the film, you see the witches manipulating these two detectives who come to talk about the one character,
Patricia.
Chloe Grace Moretz. Yeah, Patricia. They've come to talk about her, and they manipulate them into the point where one has exposed himself, and they're laughing at him. And obviously, these witches have power, so you know something big is coming at the end. It's just done to the point where it goes on for so long, it starts to become borderline campy. And I'm not into camp. I don't really understand campy type things or kitschy type things. I am a big Rocky Horror fan, but I really didn't understand that was supposed to be camp. When I was a kid, I just thought it was brilliant. I didn't realize it was making fun of itself at the same time, which I guess is what camp is on some kind of level. But this film starts to feel like those old 70s sorority pictures where, they kidnap all the girls from the sorority and they're all wearing baby doll dresses and all of a sudden little furry slippers, and all of a sudden they're in this big bloodbath and you can see through their dresses because the blood is making it a wet t-shirt contest. It becomes this big campy thing. And that's what I didn't like about the bloodbath sequence. It becomes so over the top that we got the point 10 minutes into it. We didn't need the next 5 minutes or however long it is. We just didn't need it. We got the point. I think it would have been eerier and creepier, and maybe that's not what Luca Guadagnino wanted, but it just started to get to a point where if some young fraternity guy, not that there's anything wrong with sororities or fraternities, I'm just saying the typical guy who would make fun of something he's uncomfortable in, or the person who would make fun of something in a movie that they're uncomfortable with, if he had shouted something out in the theater would have started to laugh at the sequence because it just goes on too long. We get it. It's an interesting effect when the first person blows up, and you could have had that with the creepy black witch death angel person, whoever that person was that came from the lower depths, and I guess is commanded by Suspirium to kill all these people. If you had just seen it, and then he does those weird kind of like editing things where people, and maybe you can speak on this better because it's got to be a frame per minute, right? Or frame per second, right?
Yeah, I read an article with the cinematographer Sayombu Mukdipram, and he said
God bless you.
that he shot with a whole range of frame rates in that scene. He shot it at 6 frames per second, 12 frames, 34 frames, 50 frames, and even 100 frames. And of course, normally you would shoot at 24 frames. So none of the frame rates that he just said are the normal frame rate. So he's able to shooting at 100 frames a second. That would be like slow-mo. Shooting at 6 frames a second, if you play it back at 24 frames, then it's gonna seem like really fast, like jumpy. And they also used what seemed like strobes in there, and then they also kind of like just painted the whole frame with red. So that could possibly be covering over for maybe not the greatest CGI in the blowing up of heads portion, but at the same time, that I think helped the scene to differentiate itself from the rest of the movie, number one, and number two, make it visually interesting and to give it that kind of like otherworldly, possessed quality where it's like, these aren't normal people doing normal things. The things that are happening in this room are completely, outside of human capabilities. So I understand that, and I think that was a great choice. But once again, I registered that fairly quickly, and like you said, it seemed like it went on for 15 minutes. It probably didn't go on for 15 minutes. It probably went on for 6 minutes, but probably could have gotten away with 3 minutes. So, that's, I don't know. I mean, I felt like it was an effective scene, but it just got less effective as it went on.
I think I just figured it out for myself. I just flashed onto the scene, and you know what's the most interesting part of that is when the dancers are still doing their thing in that ritual. And if that whole thing had been a dance sequence and everything had seemed like it was choreographed, which obviously it has to be choreographed on some kind of level because the actor needs to know where to go and the camera needs to know where to be. But if it had seemed like a dance piece instead of whatever it was, then it would have worked better for me because there is one shot where he pulls away and it's going very fast.
Yeah.
And it's doing kind of like that weird strobe thing in your eye, but it's not a strobe, it's the frames per second, I guess. And you see the dancers doing their thing, the girls, the naked dancers, and it's very interesting looking. And you see the death figure, black creature thing blowing people up behind them, and it's very interesting looking because it seems like that was a ritual and that it would have had a choreography behind it. So it's not that I thought what was happening was bad. It's just the length of it and the ideas behind it. There just seemed to be too many things going on at one time. And I'm not talking about the confusion of the scene. I'm talking about all of those things seem to be too much in one condensed part of the film. If you wanted to do 100 frames per second or 24 frames or 36, whatever he wanted to do, that would be okay. But then it needed to be, for me, it needed to be when you saw the angel of death or the witch of death, then she was going to be shot in 35 frames per second. But then when you saw the dancers, they were shot in 100 frames per second. And then when you put that together, it would have simplified it a little bit. But for all of that to happen at one time, it lost its effectiveness. I was desensitized before I could even feel the impact of what was happening because it's so much so soon. And it might be one of those things that on a second watch, it clicks and you understand why he chose to do everything that he did. But for me, it took me out of the film versus added something to it for me. Because up to that point, that whole sequence with the dance upstairs and then the ritual downstairs is very interesting. It's kind of the payoff for why you've come to this movie, payoff being lack of a better term, and you kind of get excited even though you're kind of scared, and then you find out all this stuff is happening, that Jabba the Hutt thing creature is not going to be the actual person, and then Tilda Swinton's head getting chopped off or getting chopped is very interesting. How that's filmed, how it's kind of slow and fast all at the same time. That's very well done.
Did you notice at the end, like after it was all over and they're kind of like cleaning up downstairs, one of them like picks up Tilda. Yeah, that seemed oddly out of character for that moment. Like, it's because I laughed, and I was not the only one who laughed in the theater. Did you laugh? They picked up her head, and she's laugh, like still alive-ish.
Yeah, no, I didn't laugh. I thought, because then they shoot very quickly to that other kind of what's the costume creator in The Incredibles? Edna.
Yeah.
That weird kind of bowl cut haircut that Edna has in The Incredibles. There's a witch who has that same kind of haircut.
Yeah.
They shoot to her like as they're lifting Tilda Swinton's head up. It's almost like that witch sensed that was happening and kind of looks, and the camera kind of shoots to her, and she's kind of just like, but you're not really sure why is that significant. Like, does that mean that what's the significance of it?
I don't know.
Maybe they just wanted people to hear what it would sound like for half severed head to be put back on, because there is a sound effect there that is unnerving. I'm not really sure. By that point in the film, I have gotten what I think I'm supposed to be getting, and I kind of shut off a little bit because I just could not take anything else in at that point. And I also had to go to the bathroom really bad. That is the truth. But that is something to say about the film, is that I had to go to the bathroom about a third of the way through, and I stayed all the way, and I didn't go, and it was building up to the point where I was like, oh, I'm going to have to go. But I stayed because I wanted to see what was happening. So I don't know what the resistance was, but no, I didn't laugh. I just didn't understand what was the purpose. Her being dead or her being alive, then you need to make a choice of why that is the way that it is. If she's dead, obviously, because they don't want her to be the next Supreme or Superium, or if she's alive, she has enough power to live through death. I don't know. So no, I didn't laugh, but I also think it's unimportant and it was not necessary.
So what about the very last scene then with, so they take the Klemperer character back to his house, and Dakota Johnson erases his memories, but before she erases his memories, she kind of gives him a little talking to and says, I don't really you're better at remembering lines than I am. What did she say to him? Did she say like there are people who need to have guilt, but you're not one of them? And she explains to him what happened to his wife.
Well, see, I'm not sure. What I took from that was that what he was doing with Patricia at the beginning of the film was teaching somebody who had a gift or born into a disposition or was born a witch, and this psychiatrist or psychologist, whichever one he is trying to tell her that's a delusion, and that her delusions have now become real, and that these people aren't really witches, that's something inside your head. I thought Dakota Johnson was telling him there's a place for guilt and shame and all that in this world, but you cannot give that to people who are witches or who are these creatures, because we don't want your guilt to make us feel bad that we're something that we're not what you say we are. You say it's a sickness, it's a psychosis, it's that kind of stuff. But the more I think about it, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I heard. I'm not sure, because the bottom line for me on that is why would Dakota Johnson care if this doctor felt guilt about his wife dying in Nazi Germany? Why would she care? But I don't know. The more and more I think about it, I thought I heard her say, you can't transfer your misogynistic and your guilt to my people because these women are gifted. they shouldn't be shamed. They shouldn't feel bad that they have a psychosis, because they don't. They're witches. They have power. And you men have been doing that to us forever, and it ends because I am Superium. I am the Supreme. I'm now going to take over. I have no idea. Because it doesn't make sense to me. Why would she try to take his guilt away from, because actually the one witch says to him, when they're manipulating him, believing that he's seen his wife again, that she's come back. That's a great sequence, by the way.
So creepy. Oh my gosh.
It's a different movie for me. That's interesting to me, but that's not the movie I thought I was watching.
Yeah.
We made that point, and we're going to get back to that point too. But she says, well, why did you let her go? Why didn't you have her papers? Why didn't she come with you? Why did you wait? Why didn't you blah, blah, blah? It's basically your fault that this happened to your wife, that you lived and she died, is basically what the witch says, in the worst possible way, on one of the last days before Russia invaded Germany and stopped that from happening. It's horrible because they say it happens like the day before that she dies. So those are the bad witches, and now Superium is the better of the witches, even though she killed all these other people. Is she now saying you shouldn't feel guilt about it? I have no idea, Josh. I'm perplexed by the ending. I will, if there's any reason to see this movie again, it's for that scene, because I'm not sure. When I first saw it and came out of it, and if you had asked me that question, I would have said she was saying, don't make us feel guilty for being something you don't understand. It's not a psychosis. You need to stop doing that. We're not going to feel shame because we are who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a whole other story. I have no idea.
And that last shot, just zooming in on the hard on the corner of his old house that he shared with his wife. I don't get that either.
I don't either, and here's why. Because the whole movie is all females.
Mm-hmm.
And even the male who is the subplot character would be the main male character in the movie is played by a female.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there's some kind of female empowerment going on here, and I'm good with that. And I'm working towards that as an audience member, and I'm like, yes, you've been burning people and hanging witches and drowning witches and people who have power you don't understand, and now that's got to stop. Germany's getting ready to go through a whole set of things that, and maybe that's why the history is important, because then we get to the Berlin Wall, and then we get to all of that history. Maybe it was supposed to be, hey, this is a new chapter, not only in the history of Germany, but in the history of this coven and this world, and we're not going to take it anymore. We have power, and we're going to use it. We obviously need to stay subdued to a degree and not make it a big thing, but we're going to use our power. But then why end on the subplot scene where the camera pulls in very closely to that cottage, which is bizarre to me because it's the size of a closet. In modern day, because the woman is on the phone, the woman who's standing up against the wall is on a cell phone, so we know it's no longer 1970. And actually, the shot is brighter, and it's much more crisp, and it's much more clear, and he probably digitally remastered that to look interesting. You see the guy coming down the road, and then you see the wall, and you see the heart that says A and J, which you see earlier on, which is part of the subplot with the doctor, and his wife is A and he is J. I can't remember which is what, but it's where they basically had their holidays and vacations and stuff like that. We're in this cottage, and they etched into the side of the wall this heart with their initials on it. Why did Luca Guadagnino decide that to be the last shot of the film? Because now it no longer is about the witches. It's about this love subplot. But what did he want us to take from that? That love lasts longer than anything, no matter what he's going to... I can't figure it out.
Yeah, or even if he forgot what he... I don't know what kind of like memory altering things she did, Dakota Johnson did to him. But if she, even if she made him forget that he had his wife, that marking on that on that building was still there. I don't really know that it actually still happened, even though he doesn't remember it happening. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but what's that got to do with the last 2 hours and 15 minutes of the film? What does
Yeah.
that have to do with the coven? What does that have to do with female empowerment? And I'm not saying that's what he wanted. I'm saying what I took from it was you got to be careful about messing with people because they have a power you might not know about. And if they turn that on you, forget about it. You got to
Yeah.
be careful. And especially people that you think are weaker than you because of some superficial reason that you're better than them because you have testicles and they don't. Whatever. Be careful of that because that will come back to you. And when somebody has power, they're going to take it out on you. So, or they're going to even the rights or the wrongs that have been, you know what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, and this might have been much more of an obvious answer, but I just kept thinking to myself, why did they not shoot back to the dance school and see Dakota Johnson being the Tilda Swinton character and it's a much more American obvious ending. Totally get that. And I get where I'm coming from and why people would be like, that's so American of you. But to have another naive type of dancer walking in the door and Dakota Johnson in those long black dresses that Tilda Swinton was wearing in the beginning, kind of looking over to the side at her end of film. I would have been okay with something like that because that would have completed the journey of Dakota Johnson. I don't understand how having the camera go slowly to that cottage wall completes the story of Dakota Johnson. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Well, here's one interesting fact is that, the J and the A, the J is for Josef, which is the, Josef Klemper character, and the A is Anka, played by actress Jessica Harper, who was the star of the 1977 Suspiria. So they brought her in to play that character. So I don't know if that is maybe, I'm just coming up with this right now. I wonder if that's kind of like a love letter that Luca Guadagnino is sending to Dario Argento, saying that, we have the new and we have the old. We have the my characters and your characters, and Jessica Harper, the actress, is the connecting tissue between those two. There's very little connecting tissue between the old Suspiria and the new Suspiria. But I mean, they did have Madame Blanc. They did have a Susie Bannion character. They did have, the three mothers type of a setup, but it was, other than those basic elements, the movie's completely different than the 1977 version. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that has something to do with it, but it does make you really question. I don't know. When I was walking out of that movie, I was kind of like, wow, I got a lot of thinking to do.
Yeah, and I had this exact same experience. What I did mention in the beginning of the podcast, this film was very elusive for me. First of all, they're only showing it in two places where I live, and they're both about 30 minutes away, which is fine. I've driven an hour and a half to see a film that was nominated for an Oscar that I couldn't see anywhere else. I don't have a problem with that. So I actually had a drive home where I had time to think about the film, and my mind was racing, and it was so energized, and then I would get to that last shot, and it was literally like my head was banging up against the cottage wall. It would just stop me in my tracks because I wasn't understanding, or at least I wasn't having some kind of emotional reaction to how I felt about what I saw. And I'm not saying that I need to understand exactly what the screenwriter wanted or exactly what the director wanted, but I definitely had feelings all the way up to that point about what I was seeing. Good, bad, or indifferent, whether or not I was right or wrong. It's that song. It's not about unrequited love. It's about, a bank in Southern California. Okay, so that's what I felt when I heard the song. So it's about what I felt. And every time I got to the thought of that shot, I just stopped. It just stopped. And so if it is a reference to the original Suspiria, now I'm even more interested in seeing the original because maybe there is a connective thread. I think that's okay, but there has to be some way that the audience that hasn't seen the original or the inspiration can connect what they just saw in the film, because there are things that are happening in a linear fashion in the narrative in this version of Suspiria. So we can take it for granted that we're going to get some kind of conclusion that has a purpose to what we just saw. Now, there's a lot of flash forwards and a lot of flashback things that happen in this, not so much flash forward, but you know what I'm saying. There's sequences that happen to Dakota Johnson as a child that's in this film. So there are different non-linear things that are happening in this movie, but the majority of the film is pretty linear. So to all of a sudden jump into something that was, might not have a complete meaning that we will understand unless we saw the original film, I don't know. There's something about that. I'm having a feeling that I don't want to leave this conversation as if I thought this film was not good because of the ending. I enjoyed this film. That's a weird word to use. I was engaged by this film throughout the whole entire process. And I have not stopped thinking about it since, and that's always a good sign for me. I'm just wondering. My instinct is, even if I know what Luca Guadagnino wanted, I still would be smacking up against that wall.
Yeah, I think I'll have to see it multiple times to even try to figure it out. So, all right. Well, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. It's late.
You've only been saying it for 5 years.
You can tweet us at tweet us on Twitter. Imagine that at Actor Engineer, and we'll see you next time.